Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Te Tayari, and today's guest is Daniele Bolelli. Drawing inspiration from historical figures like the wild Zen master Ikkyū, Daniele shows how stories, ritual, kindness, and joy can guide us toward living a simpler and happier life beyond dogma. We explore the tensions between tradition and dogma, monotheism and animism, certainty and openness, and how these contrasting orientations shape both personal and collective consciousness. Daniele brings these ideas to life through stories that have shaped him, from Bruce Lee to a 5,000-year-old mummified man in the Alps, and shares how he curates epic tales through his podcast, History on Fire, to fuel curiosity and growth for himself and his listeners. Through daily rituals, reflective practices, and following threads of meaning woven across stories old and new, he offers a wild, humble path for navigating the modern world with discernment, pleasure, and balance, inviting us to reconsider spiritual orthodoxy, nurture inner freedom, and cultivate steadiness amid uncertainty. Daniele Bolelli is an Italian author, father, university lecturer, martial artist, and podcaster based in Southern California. He has written several books, including Create Your Own Religion, On the Warrior's Path, and Not Afraid. He hosts the popular podcasts History on Fire and The Drunken Taoist, exploring history, philosophy, and the human condition. Daniele also teaches history at the university level, drawing on his wide-ranging experience to inspire curiosity, courage, and reflection in his students, listeners, and readers alike. If you are new to the show, welcome. You may like to know that I am a threshold counselor with an online practice devoted to supporting wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as guidance around death and dying. I'm currently refreshing how my work is presented on my website, so the clearest way to learn more is to set up a free insight call, a risk-free space to connect, explore our alignment, and see if we're a good fit to walk together through a pivotal chapter of your life. In my one-on-one work, I've noticed that most people come to me at significant moments of transition, when something is ending, emerging, or transforming, and often all at once. Many long for a directional, mythically rooted container to support them through these passages. Out of that insight, I've been developing a new offering called Soul Compass Spiral, a psychospiritually grounded journey through 5 phases aligned with the compass points, exploring vital questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? Along the way, we also connect with roots, ancestry, elemental forces, stories, more than human kin, and so much more. This is not about striving or arriving. It's really just about learning to listen and feel more deeply, following the sacred threads of longing, loss, becoming, and belonging in a more creative, embodied, humble, authentic, and honest way. As I continue to refine this journey in order to offer it more widely, I'm offering significant discounts for early co-creators, and right now I have space for one more person. So if this speaks to you at all, reach out and let's set up a free insight call. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your favorite podcast platform and consider joining us on YouTube as well to tune into the video component of the project. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are deeply appreciated, and they play an essential role in supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's get into some meaningful mischief together with our dear guest for today, Daniele Bolelli. If you could invite a specific historical figure into our conversation, or more generally into the general discourse, who would it be and why?
So one guy that I particularly love as a character from history, as somebody, because I've done so many episodes in my podcast History on Fire. I've done so many episodes, and after a while, I start sensing patterns in what's presented to us as history. And one of them is that it's violent as hell. So there's a lot of really violent stuff, and after a while, you're like, man, some of these are great characters, but every other story is killing and war and these, and it gets heavy. And so my absolute idol that does not go down that path, who's just the absolute delight of a human being, is this guy Ikkyū, who was a Zen master in the 1400s. Actually, for people who are watching a video, that's a painting. That's Ikkyū drinking wine that's falling from a boob of a lady over
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And EQ, I mean, that painting fits because what happens with EQ is that it's his three main passions in life were Zen Buddhism, women, and drinking. Now, it sounds a little bit, and they were in no particular order. Now, the funny thing about him is that it seems so odd, this combination. To him, that was part of his message, even on a Zen level. To him, it's like, there is no difference between the sacred and the profane.
Mm,
It's very much how you live it, as long as you don't cross certain lines. Of course, you don't do, like, unlike a lot of guys who break rules, and then they break rules in a very self-serving kind of way, in a very, Iki was like, everybody had a blast around him. People loved him. There were no scandals, no him doing shady stuff. He
mm,
just enjoyed life. And to him, the idea of going off into the mountains, secluded to meditate, was just as good as a path as partying and diving into all sort of sexual experience. And to him, the classic division between spirituality and ordinary life was an illusion. To
mm,
him, the attitude with which you live these things is what counts, is what makes it an experience, spirituality or not.
mm,
And he was a blast. I mean, the guy is hilarious. Like, half of his writings are straight up comedy. He's really funny, really just a guy who, he knew a lot about the harsh side of life. He lived during
mm,
rough times. He had plenty of rough experiences himself, but he sort of refused to let it rain on his parade. He
mm,
found a way to find joy in spite of it all.
mm.
And so I love that. That's a beautiful. That's not a common quality in historical characters. So I really like that guy.
Yeah. And in a time of unraveling that, like what we're amidst, that capacity to find the joy in life or the playfulness, to evoke the what I feel is like kind of him dancing with the playful mystery of life, not getting pulled too far any which way, not too committed to any which way, just kind of dancing and flowing with what's available and finding pleasure and joy in that. And something about that, like pleasure seems to be a kind of liberating orientation to life if done in a, I don't know what, like a life affirming way. um so having someone like that be a guide is so important these days. Yeah, thank you for
And
introducing me.
And
Yeah.
to me, step one is, I mean, I guess two things I want to say about what you just brought up. One is interesting that you're talking about the free flowy vibe of it all, because his nickname in Zen circles was Crazy Cloud, because he was like floating on his own, doing his own thing, separate from the Zen establishment, and just being very much outside of any structure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing in regard to what you say, I think you put the finger on the right spot, which is, to me, at the beginning of everything, there has to be kindness. There has to be, you as a human being need to be kind as much as humanly possible to anything and anyone you run into, provided, of course, there are such things as self-defense, there are such things as calling somebody on their shit if need be, there's something. But having said that, generally leading with kindness is rarely a mistake. And to me, once you start from that point, then breaking rules is different from somebody who breaks rules from a self-serving viewpoint, where suddenly they are doing just to build their ego, they are doing it because they want to get something out of somebody. They are, all that stuff suddenly becomes something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is not the whether you follow the rules or you break them, is the are you living with kindness or not? And
Mm-hmm.
that makes a humongous difference in regards to anything else you're gonna do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so well said. And you're emphasizing this rule breaking. And,
Mhm.
and I was sensing the trickster energy
Yep,
in him, you know?
100%.
So tell us more about that. Why are you emphasizing the rule breaking in specific?
So he clashes heavily with the Zen establishment of his time.
Mm,
And the reason why he clashes heavily is precisely because he likes Zen. And he feels that what Zen has become is heavily, mostly focused on courting the favor of rich patrons, mostly, becoming, going through the motion, doing this money making enterprise, making spirituality this very rigid kind of business. I
mm,
mean, there's a famous story, for example, when he's still a fairly young man, I think he's in his 20s, when in Zen circles, the story is that when you become enlightened, you get your teacher has to certify that you're enlightenment. So you literally get a certificate of enlightenment.
okay.
And when Ikkyu got it, he burned it because he was like, "You
Yeah.
got to be kidding me!
Yeah.
Like, really, certificate of enlightenment? Is this what we're doing?" It's like, get the hell out of here, It's like, or in another occasion they try to really mean, because they understand that he's a genius, but also he's so unconventional, and so they try to make him the head of this monastery, and within a few days nobody can find him, and he leaves behind this poem where he says, "Look, I'm losing my mind here. You guys are no, I'm not doing this stuff.
Mm,
There are some hot ladies in town. Maybe you can find me at their house these days." It's like the so he has this very, as you said, trickster energy. He
mm,
has this very, to me, he's like a real life Bugs Bunny in a way. He's just funny and weird and clashes with authority on a fairly regular basis, but not because he wants to show off or because he just likes to be a pain in the ass. It's because he feels that established authorities in his circles stifles individuality, stifles spirituality, even stifles real life. And it becomes so much of it is built on. I mean, and that's also the dark side of Japanese culture, a level of conformity, of attachment to form, of how things should be.
mhm,
And DQ is very much on, let's not play that game. Let's just, life is found somewhere else. Life is found outside of rigid forms. And
mhm,
so his rule breaking is less a teenage rebellion type of vibe and more, look, if you're going to be honest with yourself and you're going to be honest with life, there are certain rules that are an obstacle rather than a guide.
mhm,
And I think that's why he goes there.
mhm. Yeah. So important. It's reminding me actually that I think the first time I ever came across you and your work was the book you wrote. Is it called Create Your Own Religion?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Years ago. I read it at a really pivotal time, actually. I was maybe 17 or something like that. And I was the illusion of the Christianity I was raised in was rumbling
Yeah.
dramatically, and I was really quite thrown out into the abyss and looking for some kind of mooring or anchorage. And somehow I came across that book, and I'm being reminded of it now because as far as I can remember, the thesis was basically what you just described. It's like
Mm.
the rigidity that you might get from one religion as this kind of like siloed worldview is actually going to hold you back from the creative capacity of your own wild heart to
Mhm.
follow your own path into your unique expression and devotion to life.
100%, 100%. And I think it's important that it's not even most traditions have something really valuable to offer.
Mhm,
The problem is not the tradition themselves or what they bring to the table, which can be great. The problem is when you make them overly rigid, you make them dogmatic, you make them, there's nothing outside our one way. Our one way is the one and only God. Everything outside of the one way, because in nothing in life you find all the answers in one school.
mm,
Not in physical disciplines, not in anything. If you look at any, usually there are some great things you can learn from multiple places.
mhm,
So the idea that somehow in religion or spirituality there's one path that has it all from A to Z is like, come on, that's not how life works. And
mhm.
it's not a slant against any one path. They can be fantastic paths, but
Yeah,
by definition, they cannot be everything.
that's
And
right.
so there are things that you can pick up from other paths.
Yeah,
And I think as long as you're honest and fair with the process of picking and choosing what works for you and you don't do it in a superficial way, I think that's what, because ultimately, even within one tradition, people say they follow a tradition. They don't. They are selectively choosing from that tradition what they want to follow and what they don't.
yeah,
So even then, you're not really following from A to Z. You're making choices. So why not be honest and make choices a little more open? Being able to pick from whatever source provide the answers that are helpful, that deliver something to your life.
yeah, yeah. And that are more contextual too.
Mhm.
Uh, like, of course, religiosity or spiritual development was rooted in place originally, right? So the very notion of gods, goddesses, spirit realm, archetypes, mythology that came through people in specific places was completely tied to that place. And so
Mhm.
it was this inherent dynamism that I think is essential. And like you're saying, there's actually a very important ecological function to redundancy, right?
Mhm.
You need many forms and emanations of earthly flows and forces to be performing similar duties so that the system is actually more resilient. So why would it be any different in like the spirit realm, so to say?
Exactly.
And actually, I've been learning recently. I'm very curious to hear you jam on this, and it's still forming for me. So bear with me. It's the sense that the monotheistic worldview orientation to life is like you're describing this inherently rigid structure in many ways because it's basically saying, well, the other gods aren't worthy of attention.
Mhm.
But the thing is when you look inside and outside, if you really look into the livingness of the world, it's full of so much diversity, so many different aspects that come together and create relative harmony and coherence. So when you reject these other archetypes, these other gods, these other energies, you're actually rejecting parts of yourself And so I'm starting to recognize that like the psyche, the soul, is like inherently polytheistic or animistic in
Mhm.
its nature. And so the monotheistic framework and how that's filtered down into so many facets of life has actually cut us off from essential parts of ourself.
I would definitely agree. Because to me, the main problem, and again, now that I have, like, there are plenty of people who follow monotheistic traditions and they are awesome human beings and they live good lives. But from a purely theological standpoint, my main problem with monotheism is that, I mean, it's based on something that's a little hard to justify, in the sense that the very basis of monotheism is the idea of revelation, the idea that there's this one God that reveals his will to human beings. Now, first, there's a problem there because the revelation, who's it coming to? Usually, it came to some dude you have never met that lived thousands of years ago, that then told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told somebody else, who eventually wrote it down. And, first there's the obvious problem of, like, did this person really get a divine revelation, or did he just find it convenient to be God's spokesperson, or maybe he was crazy, or maybe they did get a divine revelation. But by the time they talk to, it goes through generations and it gets written down and gets through their bias, let alone the bias of everyone who hears the message. What's left of that original message? I don't know. Feels like playing telephone for too long.
Mhm.
And the other problem is that then, so to me, just the start is problematic because it's based, unless God speaks to you directly, then it's not revelation, it's a hearsay. It's second-hand information at best, more likely 30th hand by the time it gets to you. And the other aspect to me is that the problem with this idea that there's one God who gives one message and that's it, is that it really doesn't leave you too many options, because at that point you either follow it or you don't. There's not a whole lot of room for neutrality.
Mm.
So to me, what's interesting here is becomes, and not only that, because in the Western tradition, in monotheism, is not just that there's a God, because the message of Western monotheism is the other God, anything else that exists either is fake or they are demons,
Mm,
because that's the other thing in Western monotheism that is heavily dualistic.
mm, mhm,
So it's God versus the devil, heaven and hell,
mhm,
uh, good versus evil. There's all. So in a sense, the moment, if I'm hardcore about a certain monotheistic tradition and I hear that you practice something else, I don't even need to know what that something else is. Automatically, I can put you into the bad category, because it
mhm.
clearly is. If there's only one way and we have it, and you bring something else, well, that clearly is not the one way to the truth. It must be some terrible things. So,
Yeah.
makes it kind of difficult to not be dogmatic. And
Mhm,
some people manage. Some people are raised and practice monotheistic tradition, and they still manage to be very open-minded, super kind, super. But it takes them to really spin it in a certain way, which I'm glad they do. But it feels like it takes a lot of work within a monotheistic framework.
mhm.
And I think that's my main problem with it, and is also the main reason why I tend to see how often, again, not always, but often, these kind of traditions have a tendency toward dogmatism.
Why do you think this is like a huge question? So it's just
Yeah.
one of those moments where you just whatever's there. But why do you think monotheism took such a strong hold on what seems like the collective psyche?
Mhm. I think for one is, it's simple. It's a bit reassuring.
Mm,
It's, because part of the problem with an animistic framework is that if you come up with an idea that's different from mine, now it takes work on my part, because I cannot automatically dismiss it, because in my like, the animistic framework is that whatever insight you have is always partial. You never have the full truth. You have a bit of the truth.
mm,
So if somebody else comes up with something, it's like, Maybe they have something good, maybe they don't. Now I have to test it. I have to think about it. I have to
Mhm.
see how it plays out. It's a lot of work.
Mm.
It's whereas if I can just dismiss it outright, we're done. It's simple. I already have the truth. I don't have to think about it that hard.
Mm.
And I think it's simpler. In mindset, it keeps it. You don't have to constantly proceed cautiously. You don't have to. You don't have to use what Alan Watts called the wisdom of insecurity, which is this idea that you could always proceed tentatively about all your conclusions, even the ones, especially the ones you cherish the most,
Mhm.
because there's always something you may have not considered. There's always something new coming in, and you should be open to it, or at least not open to consider it, at least open to honestly evaluate it.
Mhm.
And I think that's simply too much work. One of the reasons why people love religion is because it gives them certainties,
Mhm.
because it gives them something solid to hang on to.
And
So that,
justifications.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So I think that's where it's very up. I mean, dogma, just the word we all go, oh, dogma is bad. I mean, of course, but there's a reason why it's popular. It's
Mm.
because it gives a certain reassurance that
Mhm.
most other non-dogmatic ways don't give.
Mm.
Never mind that it's usually wrong or fake or problematic for multiple ways, but it does give you that reassurance. It
Mhm.
does make you feel better about your insecurities about life.
Mhm.
So, not surprising that dogma is very popular.
Yeah, yeah, and it almost seems, as far as I understand, monotheism's like an outgrowth of civilization,
Mhm.
and it seems like it was a way for civilization, certain civilized folks or structures, entities, to actually be, like, empowered to be more dominating?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the history of Christianity, for example, early Christianity is one thing, and it quickly breaks out in a bunch of different sects who argue very different things about the nature of Jesus and what the Christian message was, and they disagree heavily with one another.
Mhm,
When Constantine decided to stop persecuting Christians, to start allowing worship, and not only that, but he actually has a real problem because he's the head of this gigantic empire. The empire is divided in every possible way by language, culture, religion. There's really nothing unifying it other than the politics of it
mhm,
all.
mhm,
And Constantine's like, this is not good enough to have the hold on power that I want to have. We need to have something cohesive throughout the empire. And the problem with monotheistic religion is that everybody has their own thing and it allows all this variety within the empire. Monotheism sounds great because now we have one emperor, one god, one message. That makes it simpler. So, okay, let's check out Jewish monotheism. Oh, no, these guys are very particular about their ethnic. There's an ethnic component to it,
mm,
and I rule over a multi-ethnic empire, so that doesn't quite work. The Christian
mm,
variation allows for pushing it to anybody, to any ethnicity, for any. That sounds real good. Oh, but wait, these guys are all arguing with one another. That's a problem. So let me squash 99% of the variations of Christianity and let's come up with one variation of Christianity. Okay, now we are in business. Now I have something that I
mhm,
can wield and use that will solidify my role and my because now I'm not just the emperor. Now I'm God's representative on earth. Now I'm
mhm,
so it became the way Christianity came to be as a part of the Roman Empire is a super cynical, power-hungry manipulation by Constantine. You know,
mhm,
and so that, I mean, paradoxically, there's at one point a later emperor who reverts to paganism,
mm,
and Christians under that emperor Julian will have way more freedom from persecution
of
than they did under Constantine, because Constantine was squashing other variations of Christianity all
right.
the time. because there was only one allowed variation, because otherwise you would mess with his political plan.
Right, right. It's so fascinating. I didn't think we'd go down this route, but I have another inquiry to go a bit deeper into that and to bring it into the present. I'm wondering what your thoughts are around what seems to be this resurgence of fundamental
Sure,
monotheism. Have you noticed that? Like,
sure.
I don't know if you follow, oh, what's his name? The Flow Genome Project. Damn. Anyway, he's a bit of a writer and talker, but he wrote like a 7-part series that you might find fascinating on this rise of fundamentalism,
Yeah.
monotheism. I just want to know your thoughts on that, how you're analyzing that, how you're seeing it.
I think it makes perfect sense, and not even just religiously, but even politically. If you
Mhm,
look at how we are in a phase in which democracy seems to be seriously in crisis, and there's everywhere around the world you see popping up semi-dictatorial figures flexing muscle and trying to take it a much more autocratic view. Why? Didn't we leave dictatorships behind decades ago? Didn't we leave hardcore fundamentalism decades ago? The quick answer is no, and there's a simple reason for it. Is we are at a time in history when things are changing at light speed.
mm,
This level of change is terrifying to most people, because most people used to be that you raise your kids and you can teach your kids skills that they are going to be valuable 40 years later. Right now we have no idea what life will be like 5 years from now.
mhm,
So obviously this level of fast change creates monstrous fear, monstrous insecurity.
mhm,
Nobody likes that. And so, what messages are going to be the most successful? The ones that promise you certainty. The
mhm,
one that the dictatorial guy who comes around and say, "Don't worry, guys, I'll take care of it all. Just follow me. I have the vision. I have the right way. I have the path. I will make sure that everything is great. I will take care of business." In many ways, is fear feeds into everybody's daddy's issues, where they want some strong person who comes forward and tell them, "Don't worry, little one, you don't need to be afraid. I have the right way."
mm,
So to me, it's not surprising to see both religiously and politically these kind of dogmatic strong men emerging and pushing this message and it being very popular. I
mhm,
think it's an inevitable consequence of people being terrified, and
mm.
understandably so, understandably terrified.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe it even goes beyond like the individual and that there's some kind of collective mythic force that like because we're amidst collapse, and
Mhm.
um but of course the structure that's been in place, not that it's static, right, but this kind of like living mythic psychosocial structure that's been in place is it I imagine it wants to stay, it wants to be stabilized. And so it's like flowing through certain actors that have influence that are then taking up that role to like stabilize the structure, which to me in my perspective is mad because
Mhm.
you can't stop collapse at this scale. So
Right.
the very act of like trying to stabilize amidst it to me is actually a level of insanity. And
Sure. Sure.
it's so difficult to reckon with when I feel like I see it differently and how to like even communicate that. I guess that's what's happening now. Um, yeah. How
Yeah.
what are some antidotes that you feel are are available to this? Like what is antidote the right word? Like how are you meeting it? How are you meeting it in yourself?
I think there are a couple of important aspects. One is sort of all purpose that you can use in a bunch of ways, whatever it is that you find yourself struggling with, because maybe You're scared, maybe you're angry, maybe you're whatever. I find it extremely useful to have rituals. And by rituals, I mean to have something that center you, that reminds you of who you want to be. You know, who's the person you want to be? How do they deal with certain emotions? How would they tackle your ideal self? How would they tackle fear, anger, frustration, all the terrible things that life is going to throw at you throughout the day?
Mhm.
Have a practice where you wake up and you take a few minutes and maybe it's listening to a piece of music, maybe it's reading some literature, maybe it's just thinking about it, maybe it's whatever, but just a few minutes to make you think, this is who I want to be. This is the me that I want to walk through this day. I
Mm,
think it's helpful because we can all know exactly what the right message is for us and still miserably fail to practice it because you get caught into the swirl of emotions and dark forces that hit you from every direction.
mm,
So having something that where you sit down and go like, today I'm not gonna be whiny and reactive and snap at people, and when I to really make a point to have this model of who you want to be in front of you and
mm,
really focus on it. It makes it easier to
mm,
respond that way when challenges pop up during the day, as
mm,
opposed if you just wake up and run with it.
mhm,
Is you can know certain things intellectually, and it doesn't mean they are gonna be there for you the moment you need them. It's kind of like this is a way to prime yourself so that you can have more the responses you want to daily life challenges
mhm.
as opposed to just run with it and get smashed because and then you're like, well, that was not the way my ideal self would have handled this situation.
Mhm. Yeah. So in a fragmented world that's has endless ways in which it's pulling at us and
Yeah,
fragmenting us, having ritual enactments of gathering yourself up and orienting toward who you know yourself to be in the deep. It's like connecting with your deep self.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Okay.
more often than not, I mean, is rarely by the time you're an adult and you've read enough and all of that, rarely somebody's gonna tell you something that never crossed your mind, where somebody gives you an insight that's like, whoa, I never thought of that. More often than not, somebody's gonna tell you something that you already know, but maybe they say it more clearly, maybe they say it in a more eloquent way, maybe they say it just in a way that clicks for you in that moment.
Mhm.
So the reality is that most people have at least some variation or another of the right answers for them already. It's
Mhm.
just that you don't necessarily know how to access them on a regular basis. They just pop in whenever they want, and or you archive them as a thought in your head, as like a belief, but not an embodied something, not something that you live through day
Mhm.
by day. So I think is most stuff that you hear, that you listen, that you read is just a reminder, is a reminder of certain things that you have already come across, but is maybe a cleaner reminder, maybe a better reminder, maybe a reminder that inspire you to action more than some other.
Mhm.
But it's just helping you. Like the thing I hear most often as a compliment when I got people who like something I've done is never, oh my God, I never thought of that. Is wow, you said something that I've always wanted, it has always been at the tip of my tongue, and you said it in a way that clicked.
Mhm.
So it's not that I give them something all that new, is that they usually already had an inkling of an idea, and maybe I just made it clearer in a way that click with them.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
which is like a shared resonance,
yeah.
which comes through the coherence that you're actively establishing within yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I thought of the author, Jamie Wheel. You know Jamie?
No.
No? I'm going to email you the series on Substack, and if you're interested, you're interested. But yeah,
Good.
remember that. And I wanted to I wanted to shift because we only have not so much longer. I wanted to ask you about how you go about choosing the stories that you dive into and amplify through your History on Fire podcast. What's that process like of, because there's so many different pathways, of course, and it seems like you choose very interestingly kind of obscure stories sometimes. So I'm just so interested to hear about your process of what feels meaningful enough to you to take up the very obvious immense amount of energy and commitment, devotion to crafting this story and amplifying it for people of today.
I think is I'm looking for great tales, the tales that make you go, "Whoa, did that happen? Wow, that's amazing." So I want something epic. I want great characters where, I mean, sometimes I can do a story without clear lead characters. Most of the time, it's so much easier to follow when you have characters. And of course, there have to be enough reliable sources on these to be able to put together a narrative. Occasionally, there are stories that are fantastic, but so little is known about them that you can only talk about for like 15 minutes or something. And that, maybe I'll do a mini episode on Patreon or something like that, but I cannot do it as a full episode.
Mhm,
So it needs to check a few boxes, and there has to be enough information on the story for me to be able to tell it accurately.
mhm,
It has to be a big epic tale, and there have to be characters that are powerful and interesting enough in their own way.
yeah.
And so sometimes they are well-known stories. Sometimes I did a series about the Spanish conquest of Mexico. That's pretty well known. That's a big deal. People know Cortes and Moctezuma and all of that. Other times I'll do it on, as you put it, more obscure topics that are less well known. You know, I remember an episode at some point about this lady who hardly anybody knows, who was like the head of the biggest pirate confederacy ever. Was this Chinese lady at the beginning of the 1800s? Or like, so the range is all over the place in that regard. The thing I care about is that they need to be, because nobody has to listen. I don't have a captive audience. I need to have tales that people want to listen to because there's something powerful there.
Yeah. So you obviously feel something from the story yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so what's other than what you shared at the beginning, with what's his name again?
EQ. Ikkyu.
Yeah. So other than EQ, what's what's a historical moment or story that you've dove into that like fundamentally shifted your perception, changed your path, altered your path even,
Sure.
or just like really gave you life and yeah.
There are many. There are many. I think is like, for example, one series that was fun that may sound more superficial from some people's viewpoint, but like I did this two-part series on the life of Bruce Lee that most people know purely as, martial art actor guy and stuff. And it was a fascinating story to me because he starts in Hong Kong. He then moves to North America. There's a cultural changes of the 1960s, in particular in United States, filtered through this guy doing martial arts. But there's a much bigger story there.
Mm,
His worldview, the way he clashes both with Chinese culture and with American culture in certain ways, is interesting.
mm,
Is It's a great tale, and you almost forget, like, the part about these movies. It's really not the important part. It's like
mm,
there's everything else surrounding his story. It's very interesting. It's interesting philosophical. It's interesting so a story like that I have fun with. You follow the tale of this guy. You follow, to me, that just, and that's relatively recent history because he died, what, 50 years ago or something. At the same time, I'll do an episode about, I remember an early one I did about this story from 5,000 years ago of this guy who was found, this body was found mummified in the Italian Alps.
yeah.
And then, they did all these studies and they started getting so much information out of that body was been there for 5,000 years. And this That's fascinating in its own way. So, the beautiful thing about history is that it's a never ending supply of just about any topic you are into. If you are into sport, you'll find some great sports stories. If you are into fashion, you'll find some great stories associated. You find stories about anything, really.
Hmm.
That's the fun about history.
Hmm. So what is it that really drives you? Is it just this like insatiable curiosity to learn about yourself and humanity, or what other elements are
I
within
think,
you?
I think that's the point of storytelling, right? Is the
Yeah.
reason. I mean, some people only watch, like maybe we watch movies or read books purely for entertainment. For me, has always been, yeah, supposed to be entertaining, supposed to be fun, but also there's something else in the great movies or TV series or music or literature. To me, is about getting tools, getting ideas that then serve me in day-to-day life. Maybe reading about this guy's toughness in dealing with adversity, something that then, I can tell the history of it, but then I find it inspiring for my own life.
Mm,
Or maybe reading about things where I can take bits and pieces, and both positively and negatively, because sometimes you read somebody doing horrible things and you
mm,
see, where somebody has fallen off the path, and maybe the temptation of power or something leads to horrible mistakes. That's a lesson too in its own way.
mhm.
So I am interested in this mix of entertainment on one side, but also something that I can take out of it for my own life.
Yeah, which seems to be like real entertainment, right?
Yeah,
Right.
to me,
Yeah,
that's the point. It's like, otherwise, if it's just entertainment to kill 2 hours, I mean, sure, cool, but that's not quite the same thing.
yeah, yeah, to bring you more alive. Yeah. And it's interesting you describe, because I know you have a martial arts background, and Bruce Lee coming over from Hong Kong and having that mixture. Of course, you're from Italia originally, and so I could see the kind of parallels and why you might feel drawn to the tensions that he was working with in his life. Yeah.
And ultimately, he's very much was an individual. He
Yeah.
was quirky and weird, and that his own path that he created that did not fit neatly in any one existing path.
Mhm.
So it's fascinating because it's different. It's like, oh, that's a person who makes bold choices. Let's see where that goes. Let's see how they handle that
Mm.
and all of that. So it's, I mean, in his story, there's even something that I never picked up on until I did the research, that there's a certain sadness about his success. He achieves, I mean, what he achieves is like winning the lottery 5 times in a row, is just a ridiculous compared to where he starts and the obstacles he has to go through to the superstardom he achieves is amazing. It's
Mm.
more success than anybody could have ever hoped for, given those cards. And there's a moment where he gets everything he wants. And it doesn't last long because he dies shortly thereafter, but he gets everything he wants and he realizes that's not what he wanted.
Mm.
And he's like, I thought you would give me more freedom. He's giving me less freedom.
Yeah.
I have a bigger and golden cage, but this is not the freedom I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it's
Mm.
fascinating because, we so often think of the success as being the thing that's going to make us happy. And then he was very honest about getting there and going like, this is not making me happy. This is not bringing what I wanted out of it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so that was really interesting in its own way.
Yeah, those stories are so interesting. Like the bright burning comets that then go
Mhm.
out quickly, and it always makes me wonder about, well, first of all, life is such a mystery. Who knows if that's just like how it was supposed to be for them? That
Right.
was their story,
Yeah.
Obviously it was. But just like tending to our innate genius and our heart, and I would say like our soul and why it's here, and like balancing that genius, like grounding it in a way, because I don't want to burn up like a comet like that. Like I would like
Mhm.
to live a relatively long healthy life,
Yeah.
but then it kind of pulls away from that more hot fire burning path,
Yeah.
trailblazing path, you know? Yeah.
That's why it's a balance. That's why there are choices made. That's why it's like, how can I get the best of both worlds? What can I? And of course, there are things you have to sacrifice anytime you make choices.
Mhm.
But that could be interesting. That could be like, okay, how can I get the best of the trailblazing explosive one without burning out? What's the lead? How much can I push it and still keep it where you can have a long, healthy life and not
Mhm.
be complete? Is there a sweet spot there? And that's part of the process of figuring that out.
Yeah, and well, we started before we were recording. You talked about how you're in a sweet spot in Ojai right now, and
Sure.
uh, you've had like quite great success with your work and the podcasts. And how do you tend to that balancing actively? I imagine
Um,
you have all kinds of opportunities and pressures and things happening. And how do you work with that
I
yourself?
mean, it's tricky in the sense that like to me, if people are honest about, it doesn't even matter who you are. If you have ever had any kind of success, you end up recognizing that yes, there's hard work, yes, there may be quality that you produce and talent and whatever the hell stories that people tell themselves, and those are probably true to some degree. But there's also, and that's the thing that most people do not bring up because of it doesn't fit with how cool they are, and
Mm,
there's also a monstrous amount of luck, like
mm,
monstrous amount of luck.
yeah.
So to me, a lot of success is like hard work and talent and all of that is like, okay, great. Now you have a lottery ticket. That does not ensure you win.
Mm,
That just puts you in the running. Without it, yeah, you probably don't even play the game. But all it does is give you some lottery tickets. That's
mm,
it. And the winning part, a lot of it is luck, being at the right place. I mean, like a lot of the stuff I've done that still works well to this day, History on Fire included, if I started it today, the exact same thing, I don't think it would go anywhere. I don't think it would have any success.
mm,
And it's, simple things. When I started, there were probably 500,000 podcasts in the world. Right now, there are 6 million.
yeah.
That
Right.
right there changes everything.
Right.
If I randomly found myself through really no good reason platform on some huge podcast that put me in front of a big audience, if I didn't have that, probably I could have done the exact same quality and a fraction of the people would have ever heard of what I do.
Mhm.
So to me, there's an import, and it's also both. That's a part of succeeding that I find frustrating is that to me so much of it is out of your hands.
Mm,
Like there are things that for everything I've done that has gone really well, there are 10 others that are just as good or better that have gone nowhere.
mhm.
And you're like, why? There's no, and the why is because I'm thinking that quality is what leads to success. And
Mm,
it's not. Quality is like one of 20 elements that go
mm,
into something being successful.
yeah.
I'm just focused on the quality. And so I think, why doesn't that lead here? Or why did this one work and this one doesn't? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's looking at it through the wrong lenses. Because honestly, and again, it's a message that most people don't want to hear because we want to have work hard, do everything, and you will get where you want to be. Like, yeah, if you're really lucky, that's how
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
But luck does play a big role with things.
Yeah. So in the wake of all that, what's a lesson to be gleaned from it? It just to play with like kind of tidying that up into some kind of lesson.
I think when it comes to this stuff, you have to, and you weigh, and by the way, I'm going to say things that for the most part I don't practice because I get frustrated as hell. And I'm like, so I need to hear that myself a lot. But I
Mhm.
think it's important to, I mean, obviously you got to pay bills. So you have to figure out a way to keep a roof over your head. And so you do need a certain level of success. And so, in that sense, to me, if you are engaging like a creative pursuit of any kind, you probably need two paths. One that covers your ass with at least the bare minimum of paying the bills and make sure they are okay.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you have another project, that's your gamble project, that's your lottery ticket, that's the one where you are hoping that. And the thing is, if it works and you make bank and you succeed in that fashion, that can become your main thing, and that's fantastic. But the reality is that, for first, it's far from guaranteed that that will be the case. And second, a bunch of people get that success and are still unhappy. So to me, it's also important to remember, forget success or in success, what makes you happy? If
Yeah.
nothing changes in the outside world, how can you bring a certain degree of happiness in the here and now?
Mm-hmm.
Not in the future if things work out, not if you played your cards right, not if your lottery ticket gets picked, right here and right now.
Mm-hmm.
And would you be okay doing the things I do, even if they never lead to any kind of external success?
Mm-hmm.
Would you enjoy it anyway? What would you do if that was never even a factor?
Yeah.
I think those are important things to consider and to remind yourself of. Because, I mean, sometimes I ask myself, like when I write something, I'm like, if my daughter reads it and love it, isn't that enough? Is there a number that I need to feel that now I can feel good about myself? How many do I need? 5,000 people to read it? 20,000 people to read it? What's the sweet spot? It's kind of like, the people who will, I want to become a millionaire. They make $1 million and now they're like, no, really, I wanted 5 million. That's when happiness is going to hit. No, I wanted to be able to fly, and they never get there
Mm-hmm.
because they were chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Extricating fulfillment from this external
Yeah.
success validation, and also just this external alignment with the culture that's just here for a moment,
Mhm.
like I think our fulfillment comes from a deeper, longer time frame, that's more connected to, yeah, just more depth rather than the momentary social fad or
Mhm.
direction. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay. Um, Considering what you know about history and all the different time eras that you've dove into, I imagine there's some patterns that you recognize that feel important. And I'm just wondering if you could direct us listeners just to pay attention to some general patterns that you think need to be paid attention to. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Let me think. Hmm. I think, I mean, there are many, 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 of course. I'm trying to isolate something that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense on its own. Probably, I think like one thing that we touched on, and so that's why it's coming to me right now, is this idea of the one way, politically, historically, this desire for essentially this desire for dictatorship in a real sense, this desire for the because that's the problem of like, is there a system that works perfectly? No, there isn't. It's always in the hands of individual. There was a thing that this guy, this Greek writer Polybius wrote, that he wrote like each political system has potentially a good side and potentially a really dark side.
Mm-hmm.
They take even like the tyrant, the dictator, that's the dark side. The good side would be the enlightened king or queen who is one person, so you don't have to go through a whole bureaucracy, makes great decision and helps the country.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, that becomes instead the dictator and the tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
We take a real aristocracy, the word aristocracy is like the rule by the best. Like take some of the smartest, greatest people in society who come up with something. That's fantastic. But if they are not the best, then it's an oligarchy, which is just government by the few, and they are not necessarily doing the best, and so that becomes the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Say a democracy can be fantastic in a way, unless it becomes mob rule and people are too dumb to make good decisions and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is like, or you have some anarchist dream that can be fantastic in the hands of people who have all the skills to live without rules, and it becomes an absolute nightmare in the hands of self-serving predatory people who lack the skills to live without rules in a good harmonic way. So the idea is there's no system that's perfect. There's no system that works all the time or even most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It really is about the quality of individuals involved that
Mm-hmm.
shape whether a system is good or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, whereas a system you can design it and think about what would be the ideal system and play that, figuring out how to inject human qualities, the real is the key element that makes a difference in all of it. And of course, that's easier said than done because that requires a whole bunch of human beings to work on themselves, to change themselves, to be at their absolute peak and not fall into all the darker temptations that show up in everybody's life, giving in to frustration, anger, and lashing out and being mean and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Daniele. This has been truly just such a blessing for me. Like I said, just listening to you, tuning into you for many years now, and getting to sit down like this is really special for me. And I really appreciate where we went with the conversation. Feels
Oh,
nourishing, supportive. Yeah.
thank you so much. This was fun.